Second.
All of a sudden, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's
Well,
on
it's
with the
been-
flu.
Oh, so nice, I got the stomach bug. And then it disappeared quickly, and turned into.
Welcome, everybody, to the Curriculum Committee meeting for the month of March. My name's Matthew Marshall. I'm the chair. We could go around the room and introduce ourselves.
Diane Potter.
Tony Veet.
Veronica Babcock.
Matt Lillibridge.
Angela Hardy, Director of Curriculum. And Terry is just in, thank you. No, it's fine. I just don't like to exclude you, Terry. Okay. Before we start on agenda item number 2, I'm gonna hand this around. This is just a flyer. It's gonna actually look smaller starting tomorrow. That will be emailed and then going around our district announcing the workshop day on March 18th, which is next week. March 17th is an early release day. It's a half day. That's building-based learning sessions. And then the 18th is a full district workshop day. And I kind of mentioned this a little while ago, that we really wanted to use the day to highlight strong practices that our district has become good at and highlight educators and instructional leaders in the district. And so while this doesn't share all the sessions yet that are being offered, it does kind of give you an outline of how our day will run. And we're going to be doing some building-based work in the morning with Nate Levinson. He's going to be our keynote speaker who will come in. Nate Levinson was formerly of District Management Group, is now of New Solutions K-12. And he was a superintendent, board member, educator, author, consultant, and he worked directly with our district for about 2 years as we worked to shift towards understanding where we are strong as a district and where we have opportunities to grow to be more effective and efficient in meeting students who are struggling. That's the lens that we looked at. And it's helping us shift to more kind of inclusive and equitable practices for all learners on the academic side. When we say that, it's around academics. And he also does look at things with a little bit of a cost-effective strategy too. So the goal long-term is to do this in a manageable way for the budget, as well as an efficient and effective way to support student growth and achievement, where historically we have not been able to move the needle. So our special ed identification, students identified as special education, students that are in receiving tier 2 and 3 services, where historically they're not making adequate progress. In what ways can we think about redesigning our system to support that? And we've made a lot of gains in the last couple of years. Nate Levinson and his group actually presented partially to the board a couple of years ago and to our guiding coalition. And so he is going to do a 75-minute exercise with our staff on where we've gone in 2 years, how this situates kind of nationally, and where we're leaning in to continue to improve, sort of in an interactive way as much as we can in virtual space. And then we'll move into the afternoon, well, mid-morning, 10:30 at Gardner Area High School, where we'll have 3 different hour-long learning sessions that staff can choose from. There's plenty of sessions being offered during each of the hour-long blocks for them to select from internal presenters. So that the actual sessions are going to be announced on Monday for sign-in, so people can read through them and sign up, and we can make sure we have adequate numbers in every session and that sort of thing. So just so you know, that's going around, and just wanted to keep you in the loop. And so curriculum budget, that's what our agenda item is. So every year we get to do this together. We spend time looking at the curriculum budget. I often give you a 3 or 5 year overview, but what I've learned this year, getting the quotes for everyone, is that the prices are changing pretty rapidly the materials prices, license prices, staffing prices for different organizations. So some of my estimates are gonna be off, so I'm sort of waiting on the updating my 3 to 5 year cycle until I can get those costs under, get a handle on those costs. A lot of the new information is being analyzed by the vendors between March and May. So I figure before the end of the year, I can update the long-term budget plans. And the other thing that we will do together, hopefully next month, if all the federal dollars come in, the estimates come in, we'll look at the federal budget, which for us is Titles 1, 2, 4, and 5. So there are other federal dollars, the American Relief Funds, that's not part of this curriculum team. You look at that as a board, as a full board. But Titles 1, 2, 4, and 5 are annual. It's based on our free and reduced lunch enrollment numbers, which are not looking so hot right now. And those estimates start coming in. We have Title V's estimate, but not the other estimates yet. And then we talk through how those funds are being used and who we, how each school team, which includes parents, looked at those funds and considered use. For the most part, that's staffing. There's not a lot of extraneous funds in those uses of those dollars. So we'll do that at a separate time. This is just, today, we're just going to look at the local budget. Terry, yep, I plugged in. What's my next step? Because I'm still a new platform to me. And you each have a copy of what I'm going to share. So if it's easier in front of you, but because we're live streaming, I like to also make sure it's posted. Close out these other tabs so I don't get it confused. I do the share Zoom. Oh, I don't have to do anything. Okay. Super. I'm gonna make it bigger. Maybe. I think I can. That's funny. Usually I could make it.
Like that.
I don't have it. Well, that's a bummer. I wonder, oh, here it is. Maybe it just needed to think. Like,
That
oh,
was great.
is that a little better? Should I want a little bit bigger?
That's fine.
That's
Okay.
okay for me.
Okay, so it's in front of you as well and as up there. I just wanted to give you a little context. So I gave a couple other years prior to this coming school year. So the green column, column F, is the column that's in the proposed drafted budget. This is not the final budget for curriculum. We're only at the beginning of the process. As you know, every line is looked at intensely by our business manager, our superintendent, myself, and then the full administrative team, and then also looked at by you. And we go over each line and try to understand, why is there a change in the line? Is there any adjustment for that? And then in my case for curriculum, as you can see with fiscal year 22, some of those costs that are under fiscal year 22 were actually redirected to the ESSER funds, the federal relief funds. And so while my bottom line in curriculum coordination and development was 159 last year, it actually dropped lower than that because we were able to move, before the budget finally passed, we were able to move some of those dollars into the federal dollars and take less of a hit on the local taxpayers. So that is why over here, these are the categories that I have. There's no change in substitute. When I pull teachers to work on curriculum, we pay substitutes out of this line rather than our general substitute line. And then when teachers work with me or staff works with me outside of contract hours, summer work, extended work for detailed curriculum, specifically curriculum, it's paid for here. There are some federal funds I can access for that purpose and some I can't. So that's why we carry some here. When I got here, that line was actually 20,000. So I try to keep it at 10,000 and still do the work. Our conference line is down. But I can show you how that plays out. Our software agreement line is up, and that is mostly because we have a software license called Lexia that is for a lot of those foundational skills. It's really hard to find a license that we feel targets very specific skills, has a really good data and reporting system that teachers can use, and also provides supports for intervention practices that match the students' data. And we feel like Lexia does that really well. This does expand the license to allow access for a few more students that we're noticing can really use it. So instead of just K2, it's going K2 and then a targeted group in 3 through 5. And we pay the most cost-effective use of this license is to pay 3 years at a time. And so 3 years ago, this was in the budget. And now that's coming to an end. And so then it's up for a 3-year renewal. And the way they do it, Lexia does it, is you pay all up front. So some licenses don't. Some licenses you can lock in a deal, kind of like oil pricing. You can lock in a deal and pay monthly at one rate, or pay yearly for us. This particular license, you pay for the license up front and then everything follows it for 3 years. So it inflates the budget for curriculum every 3 years. And I try to plan for that and reduce it in a few other areas. So you can see the conference line is reduced this year. There's a few other lines I reduced in order to take a little bit, absorb a little bit of that license.
So I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
So the 109,000 is for 3 years?
Now, that's inclusive of other licenses I'm going to show you.
Oh,
Yeah, but that's why that one particularly jumped.
Okay.
Normally it would not.
And so those other 2 fiscal years are software license agreements, but don't include Lexia costs, the 79,000 and the 66,000. Okay. So that is sort of a what, a $43,000 jump because of Lexia? Is that?
It's a little more than Lexia, so I tried to pull it in other lines. I tried to reduce other lines to try to balance it out a little bit, but it looks pretty big from there. And again, this is the first cut, so feedback from you is always welcome. This district travel line has increased because we have 5 coaches and they do travel between buildings. We do not pay for their travel at the beginning of the day and end of day. That is their responsibility, like every other staff member. But if we're asking them to go from one building to another building during the workday for work-related purposes, we do, just like any of our itinerants, we do cover some travel. Some of the mileage adds up. And so that is included in here, as well as if a little bit of travel for some district PD that we have staff go to, like at the University of Maine. So that's why that's higher than I've had in the past. The instructional supply line is a little bit higher. We can go through that, but 20,000 less than fiscal year 20. So we're trying to get that evened out with the purchase of these new curriculum materials and resources. We're trying to get this to be a stable line from year to year. We do a lot of in-house PD now, using a lot of research-based texts, and so that's going up just a little bit. But it's a lot less expensive than sending people out to PD put on by other vendors, and just as impactful. And then dues and fees, and that includes our work with that. The reason that's inflated is because usually I pay for our work when we worked with district management group out of a federal Title II line. And right now we have it in our local line until we get our federal allocation to know if we can afford to put it there or not. but we want to make sure we plan for that because it's a support that allows us to continue to have professional learning to enable the shifts that we're looking for. Our academic assessment line is actually down. So that is when we have teachers doing some one-on-one assessments. Sometimes we need someone else in the classroom to help with the students. And so that the assessments happen effectively without interruption. Our software license agreements are down. The facilities rental is when we hold certain, usually junior or senior year assessments. If we can't host those in the building, which we try to do, sometimes we have to rent a space for them to have those so they're uninterrupted based on all the guidelines that like AP and SAT and all those groups have for us. And then this is professional development for some ongoing RTI work. There'll be a license to help us manage that more efficiently than how we're doing it now. It's something the teachers have been asking for a long time. We finally found one that feels like a good fit. We cut a license in this line that was $9,700 that I felt like Terry and I have worked on for a while, and it doesn't feel like it's meeting our needs the way we want it to. And this one's less money. And seems to be more impactful to staff and students. So it's a cost savings. And then these supplies are just specialty headphones that we need for a certain type of assessment that has a special type of microphone that comes closer to the face rather than those little earbuds that hang over here. It's for the pre-K to 2 world. And then down here, this is like credit recovery, academic tutorial type support. Currently, again, we're on a multi-year contract with Edmentum, our credit recovery. We can pay for this over years. The first year is the highest cost. The second 2 years, it goes down. So that's built in here. We've been using this for quite a long time. We feel really good about it. And then at the moment, we're redirecting all these funds. And then student transportation, this is based on a federal grant we have with the Boys and Girls Club. Their costs are significantly higher. This is a nominal cost for us. We've been doing this for 16 years or something like that. And it's part of the grades 3 through 8 after school tutorial program that we have in partnership with the Boys and Girls Club. So there is a net increase at the moment in the curriculum. And I just want to give you a couple insights into those areas that you were probably pretty curious about. The instructional software, I can make that a little bit bigger. So this includes our online personalized learning platform. This is all of kindergarten through 5th grade across every building. And this is the teacher access and the workbooks and all the math program across every building, all of K through 5. So it's actually a pretty good price per student. This is that 1-year Lexia cost at $37,000. 3-year Lexia cost. And then this is a middle school license. This is our science license, all of K to 5. This is a small scale intervention for the upper grade levels where we're noticing that greatest hit in our academic achievement data around phonemic awareness. This is all of 6 through 12. This is both ELA, social studies, and a custom collection related to Native American studies that's woven in. That is a cost that we paid for annually for 3 years. I do analyze the data on this license annually to make sure we have effective use of our license. It is one of our most utilized licenses. So I can see how many teachers are using it, how many students every day, what the use is, what the usage per month, and so on and so forth. And we use this across all of our student groups, so core instruction, intervention, and in the special education spaces. Mostly because it can customize the reading levels, but still keep the content. so we can have access to relevant primary and secondary resources. Students in one classroom can have shared conversations, but they can be accessing the text at the level that they read at. So there can be independent reading access. And so you can have actually the same story in 3 different levels happening at the same time and still allow for shared conversation. And there's specific work on vocabulary that's based in context, which is what the research says is a strategy for learning vocabulary more effectively. And that's one of the other significant uses of the program. And then this is for our elementary libraries to enable e-readers for students in K through 5. We already have this at the middle and the high school, and it's through a shared state agreement. So for $750, we actually get increased access year over year based on like a consortium. As they build the profile of the text that can be available, we can access those. It's a significantly smaller price than what it would cost for us to individually resource and access each of the texts that are available within the custom collection. It's been an incredible tool, one for students to access at any time, but also for students who need to have an audiobook version of the same text. Their listening comprehension develops before reading comprehension develops in general. That's the continuum. So some students are really good at those critical thinking skills, but get hung up on the actual reading of the text. And while they're developing those skills, we don't ignore them. While they're developing those skills, they can have access to these e-readers and hear the storyline and then still be able to engage in core instruction. And so that's been kind of a game changer for some of our students. So that's that license. And then the only other jump is, well, you wanted supplies or things like we now have math manipulatives in every single classroom, pre-K to 8, based on their grade level, that are known to effectively help students learn concepts and procedures in math. And so here is just like, if we lose some, we're replacing them so that every classroom has a kit for every single student. In the past, it depended on how long the teacher's been teaching, whether or not that teacher secured some of his or her funds for those supplies in a classroom. So you would find classrooms that had like 1 million Unifix cubes, and then you'd have classrooms with none. And so we've equalized that now, so everyone has access. All students have access to the tools they need. We just have a few, we just sometimes need to update them. A few of them get misplaced. And this is our math, we're shifting our math textbooks at the middle school, sorry. And the print costs just went up this year, so it inflated. Print costs are up everywhere right now. So that got it a little bit more inflated than it usually is. And then lastly, the assessment line is the one that changed a little bit because we added the PD. So in here, this is the license we're looking at having in lieu of the license we did have. Because we feel like it meets, after working with staff, principals, Terry's helped me as the director of technology, really vet the system. This is the one that's gonna support access and communication to interventions, to student data, and to our progress monitoring more efficiently and effectively than what we were trying to use, which didn't work so well. We decided not to just keep using that. The data suggested that it wasn't working effectively. So those are some of the, and then here's like one-time PDs that support the implementation of new materials. You have to have that or no one knows how to use the material, and then the money isn't well spent. So this is the first cut. And then we have some things down here that are related to curriculum that I just monitor that go into the building-based budgets, which are like the consumable every year. The workbooks that get renewed every year, and the science kit materials that get renewed every year, because they get used because they're doing science experiments, and so those sorts of things. I just monitor because they relate directly to other licenses we have.
So I have one question.
Mhm.
The student transportation line,
Yes,
the 18,000.
Yeah.
Is that just to get students to the Boys and Girls Club?
it's for a particular program year round. It's only a fraction of the cost. Boys and Girls Club covers the rest of the costs. But it's part of the agreement with the 21st Century Learning Grant. So we've had that since I've been here. That's been in the budget as part of that federal grant that the Boys and Girls Club receives. And our contribution in order to be in a partnership with them is to fund some of the transportation costs to support the program.
What's the, have we looked at to see if it's a really effective program?
Yeah, actually, we have a data sharing agreement. All the parents or guardians have to sign off on that agreement before we can share any data. And we track their beginning of the year and end of year assessment data. It becomes blind, so I know who the students are first. I mean, I don't know any of the students, and then we make that blind, right? Because they just need to see growth or not growth. And then they run that against how many times, like their attendance rate at the Boys and Girls Club. So if the numbers were high, what was their attendance like in access to the tutorial program that they have? Did it have any sort of impact? And they actually have to submit that to the state. And they have to show evidence of progress in order to even be considered for a renewal of that grant. And they've been renewed every 3 to 5 years that the grant has
Yeah, how
existed.
much is it? I'm just out of curiosity.
I should, because I sit on the overview board because we're part of the MS. They have to have membership on it. I can get back to you.
Is it?
I would hate to misquote it.
It's okay.
It's a pretty good size grant.
And actually, would it be possible to say how many students are served by it and that there's good outcomes, but in the note, could we even have the in-kind, like we're putting in 18 grand and that actually draws a matching, or whatever they're not matching.
Yep.
Whatever they're,
We could put it on the agenda as an item so you can learn about that grant.
okay.
Yeah,
I
that
think
would be
that would
good.
probably be helpful, and we could bring someone from the Boys and Girls Club to come in and sit with us and have that conversation. I think it would be wise.
I mean, it is 18,000. It would be nice to see what we're getting.
Yeah,
for
I
the
mean,
money.
it's a few $100,000 at least annually.
Right.
So but I would hate to quote the exact amount and then be wrong.
But
Who are
Um,
is there a profile of what students take part in this?
Yeah, there are qualifying factors. And I stopped sharing my screen. How may I stop sharing my screen? Just because if I pull something up, if I don't want a student name to accidentally show up or something. I can tell you. It changes. It's a little bit variable per term, but they keep it up to date with me.
Who runs the program there? Is it a qualified teacher? Is it a?
Oh yeah, it's the whole, there's Inez, Kelly, Holly, Jordan. Ingrid oversees the finances. And they have a few other staff members. Yeah, it's a well-established program. It's been around for quite a while. At the moment, there's 91 students served. And again, that changes. So by the end of the year, it's more than that because some students come for part of the year, some for the whole year, some move in, some move out. But we have a pretty focused, and it's the students who qualify for this program have to be in grades 3 through 8.
3 through 8.
Yep.
right, we're not paying 18 grand so kids can walk from the high school to the.
No, you're right, exactly. Yeah, it is a targeted intervention program. I mean, there are different, and what I'd like is to have them speak to it mostly just because they're so fluent in it, but there are different dimensions of it. One of it is it's called Power Hour. They have to actually work on homework, instruction, like learning. They actually employ some of our staff to do that at that site. We don't make those decisions. it's after school, after contract. And then there's some health and wellness attributes to the program. So there's snack, there's nutrition learning, there's like, sometimes there's a meal prep piece, there's a physical component, there's usually some sort of physical activity that's present in their time period before they go home. So there's a number of attributes to the program to support social and academic development.
If you were to ask me what I thought the budget was gonna be this year for curriculum, I would be I would have guessed a lot higher than $24,000 increase. Based on what we've been through the last few years, so, you know, and I've said this before, and this is really the first time we've taken a dive into this next upcoming budget. I think there is no more important part of our budget than curriculum,
I agree.
so.
It's why we exist, right? For
Yeah,
teaching and
frankly, I
learning.
mean, Right, it's not for recess, right, or sports.
Right, I mean, it is a pretty focused, it is focused. I think it would help for you to see because we have a few new people on the team now, for you to see that long-term agenda, the 3 or 5 year cycle, just so you can see where things come and go. There is one item under supplies, that's why it's a little bit higher, is, and I think we actually might have moved it to the building level. There are rules we have to follow about what's allowed at the central office level and what's allowed at the building level. And Andrea is very fluent in those, and I learn them every year. So I'd have to double check on that. But we adopted a social studies program. It was an extensive process to get to the point of which one to adopt. We brought it to here for review, and you supported it. And when we did that, we selected one that has a significantly strong online component. So a lot of the teachers' materials and resources are online. I mean, they can use them in lots of different ways. They don't have to use them online or projected. And then student materials and the texts are all online too. But we were coming out of the pandemic, and we knew that not all students appreciate an online presence, reading texts online. So we purchased a class set per social studies classroom. So 60 at a grade level, 30 per classroom, so a few extra. And we found that that's really helpful. Students use them during their class period. But what we're finding now is that they actually prefer the hard text over the online reading, even though they bring their laptop home every night, right? I mean, their eyes get tired. And so the social studies team did ask if we could order another to duplicate that set, basically, so that we had access for all students. And the sets are different per grade level. So that they could, if they need to bring them home at night, there's a process that we used to use for them bringing them home and such, that they can do that. They're heavy, so that's not, those backpacks get heavy, and we were trying to avoid that a little bit. But so we did, for now, we have that in the budget to try to do that. I've gotten a fair number of emails from students this year at the middle school trying to request a little less online presence and a little more hard copy. So when students start reaching out to me, it's an issue, right? Because they don't even know who I am most of the time. So we've had conversations with middle school staff about like, what's the purpose? Why are we, what's our instructional model, and how are these being used? And so to respond to that, it is in the budget under supplies. It may have been moved. I'll have to double check my notes if it got moved into the building level. It did, but and the building level gets as much scrutiny as the curriculum level budget, just so you know. But that's because it's a direct student resource, so it has to come out of the building-based budget. But I oversee it, so it's also under my maintain overview of part of the budget.
Are we expecting any above and beyond federal funds, COVID money left? Anything else coming?
So I don't expect additional money coming. However, our American Relief Funds that are on the website, on the main website page, American Rescue Plan funds, which is ESER, otherwise known as ESER 3. But if you look on our website and you go to MSAD11.org and you click not, hang on, let me give you the title. It's not the schools tab on the top, it's the Explore tab. If you click the Explore tab, there's a big section right there that says ARP Funds.
Yeah.
And when you click ARP Funds, that is how it outlines how we're using the funds over a 2-year period. And then it tells you every single project and the amount that project has set aside for it. So those funds are for 2 years. So this year that we're in and next year. Now, some of those funds had to be, front loaded because they were things like the modular unit prep and materials, right? So those were expended this year. And some of the curriculum materials were expended this year. So we've had them for this year and next year. But like our class size reduction teachers, that is spread over both years. So this year and next year. So
one more time how to get to that.
yeah, oh, yes. Thank you, Terry. So let me go backwards. So when you go up here and you type in MSAD11.org, you come to this homepage. I think I have things a little bit big. So we have our scrolling pictures and our live feed and all that. At the top here, you can either go to our schools, which will include our school board sites and our central office sites. Or you can just, on this main page, you can hit Explore and this black menu shows up. And you see right here, here's the COVID-19 dashboard. There's our rates that we have every week and over time. And if you click on ARP Funds, I have 2 of them open now, I'll close that one. This gives you the summary of how the funds are used, the priorities that we set up, some action steps. This is what we all agreed to, including the board. And then the second click page shows you all of the projects associated with those funds across 2 years. And the title of the project and the allowance for that project. Now, of course, we're almost at that point in the year where we sit down and say, okay, what was Andrea, our business manager, monitors this daily, but what was expended, and was something unexpected, did something that we expected to have a cost for not happen? Is there a reason for it? Now, just to be clear, we don't get to move this money around willy-nilly. So every one of these projects is approved by a state team and a whole review team at the Maine Department of Ed. And they're only allowed to approve things based on federal guidelines, which are pretty strict with these funds. So if we find, we have a performance report that's due on March 25th. And that includes where we're at with our projects, every single project, a whole lot of data associated with every project, as well as all of our invoices with every project. So all of that information gets uploaded to the state, and all of the invoicing we've already done is already in the state at another section of the finance, and those two have to match. And then if we say we've had an unexpected expense or something we didn't end up purchasing or using the funds for at the time frame we expected to, we have to provide justification for that. And if we want to move dollars, let's say we didn't use project 2.10. I'm just making this up right now. Let's say project 2.10 didn't get allocated for this year, even though we had hoped to. We have 2 options. We can justify why and still use those expenses for next year. Or we can say we actually didn't expect, we anticipated using $15,000 of it. If we didn't, here's our plan for the next school year. And this is where we'd like to redirect the $15,000. We have to edit that project and the project where we think the money's going to. The review team reviews our proposal. They go through their rules and processes. It's all tracked in this site called GEMS online at the state level. Then they decide if it's approvable or not. If it's approvable, then that gets reallocated. We share it with you all annually, or many more times than annually actually. And then those expenses move forward. So even though we have all this money, we don't get to just automatically decide where it goes. Everything has to go through a process of the finance committee, the state committee, and that all has to line up to federal rules. So if that helps at all.
It does, but by the end of a certain point, it's gone, right?
Yeah, if we don't expend these dollars, by the end of school year 22-23, then those dollars go back to the state. Well, actually, the state holds on to them. They don't actually, a lot of them don't. The release structure is something Andrea knows about, but the state has that money, and then that money, depending on their rules, usually would then have to go back to the federal government if they don't get expended. And they have to be expended based on the rules. Like we can't just change that. We, at this point, I mean, it's a lot of work, but this team is usually pretty good about paying very close attention to these and making sure we're utilizing the dollars. Last year, it really helped us in our local budget. We were able to adjust things in our local budget to reduce the impact to the local taxpayers and utilize these funds instead. And that's why it's helpful and timely that this process, like we have our performance report due March 25th. We're already going through all the updates. And then there'll be a cycle of going through and saying, okay, do we need to make requests for changes? The team reviews it, Pat will bring it to finance, and then it will go to the state, so on and so forth.
But are you talking about, because I'm kind of new to this. and
Yeah.
Finance is not my field.
Yeah,
But if are you talking about COVID money?
yeah, this is COVID. American Rescue Plan
yeah,
funds are
that's what I
COVID money.
figured.
Yeah,
And I know I've heard Pat say several times, the public thinks we have all this money that we don't necessarily have.
well, we were granted funds over the last few years, and everything follows the same process. And it all goes through the administrative team, it all goes through the finance committee, it all gets looked at the full board, and it all gets approved by the state based on federal rules. And we do everything we can to ensure that we're not inflating or in fact trying to reduce our local budget. Now, there are some guidelines that, and Pat has talked about this at the finance committee, and Andrea, where there are some rules where we can't take certain dollars from one space and replace them with federal funds. There are some rules where that's true, and they'll talk that through at finance.
Okay, thanks.
And that has something to do with our annual state allocation. That's not my area. I should not speak to
You would
that.
think that they would have a line just for learning loss.
So and so what we've done is specific to instruction here is class size reduction. And those decisions were made primarily based on where did we see academic challenges persist based on our data, and how would a reduced class size support us in having a smaller teacher to student ratio, therefore impacting learning. And so we anticipated that in kindergarten because we didn't have as much pre-K, right? We knew that was to be true in 5th grade. We knew that was to be true with the current 6th grade class, things like that. So that's where some of those decisions were made. Mental health and wellness is a lot of our social emotional work, social workers, right? That was some big important work that does impact access to learning. And this line here is a lot of those curriculum decisions you made. It's a fancy name. Implementation of systematic explicit instruction, research-based programs and resources to support instruction for all learners. That's what that means. And so that's most of our ELA, some of our math and our social studies, and where we were able to kind of accelerate and adopt those this year, rather than having all of that 270,000 inside our local taxpayers' budget. So instead of, we moved it out, and it happened in 1 year rather than over multiple years. So those are after school programming, that's for instruction. Instructional coaches, that was a really important one. That's internal and external. There's some external funding there, like a school improvement coach to support the middle school as they're going through a lot of structural redesign and external math coaching to support internal math coaching. We had fewer math coaches in person, so we supplemented it with some external virtual math coaching to try to make sure there was a balance in support for staff. And then our substitutes, so that we'd have some more consistency in our learning spaces rather than a different person every day in some of our learning spaces. And they know each building well. Those are some of the really big ones. So does this help at all?
Yeah.
Okay,
So actually, where does that fit on this?
so for
I see-
example, like
I see that line.
curriculum, that would have fallen under software instruction. Hang on. Instruction software license and conference curriculum development. We're able to move a number of some of that there historically, and it's still carrying forward. Excuse me. Instructional coaches, you don't see that on this line in this budget here. And some of the supplies, mostly.
It does help, but of course, it's like technology. I mean, you have to work with it all the time to really
I know,
digest it.
I know. We'll keep working on it. Don't you
Okay.
worry, Diana.
So Angela, to
Yeah.
oversimplify all of this, the 24,490 as of today, understanding the number is gonna
Mhm.
change and stuff like that, is that's impact to taxpayers versus all of this, which is, how we've.
Right, but we're not at we're not there yet. This is draft.
Yeah,
So the goal will be to try to create it as a neutral, or this is one piece of the
bigger-
full budget. So if we're not able to make this line neutral, then they'll try to work on another line.
But if an outsider looks at this, it says all these numbers, knowing this is, the biggest difference is this is the.
The biggest
internal
difference
versus
is-
Federal.
Right, this is internal, that's federal, that does not impact their dollars from us,
That's what I was, yes, from us.
from us,
Good point.
where we have control.
I know after school programming, is there anything besides the boys and girls?
Oh,
program?
yes, yeah, we have one-to-one, so we have some in very targeted areas, one-to-one tutoring going on. We have another credit recovery program happening. And then we also have some summer programming that's wrapped up in that. Yeah, absolutely. Terry, can you not share that screen? I'm cognizant of time. We will continue to have budget conversations, so if this changes, I'll bring it to your attention. We'll have the federal Title I, II, IV, and V budget conversation. Are there any, you've asked some good questions. Is there anything else? Okay, so this was a work in progress. The other thing I just want to bring up is item number 3, social studies, core instruction and staffing. I'm bringing this up because at the last board meeting last Thursday night, there were a number of letters read, and it's important that you have an opportunity to follow up and discuss. We may have to follow up more than once, given our time frame, and that's fine. But I wanted to make sure that we put this information in context and you have an opportunity to ask some questions. And we also understand where decision-making happens. That's part of being transparent, right? Go through all that. So trying to figure out the order of operations here. So at the middle school, and I have some notes here to make sure I say this right, because some of this is before my time. Every year we look at staffing. That's one of our biggest costs in this district. Staffing, insurance, heating and utilities, right? Transportation type stuff. Those are some of our biggest costs. And so we always are diligent about looking at our staffing. Let's make sure our staffing falls into our board's policy on class size. If we have really small class sizes, then we need to look at our staffing. So over the years, we have made some adjustments at the high school and reduction of staff, and at the elementary schools and reduction of staff to equalize the class size policy, and 2, to manage our budget, because those are our biggest costs. the building that hasn't had a reduction in staff for the purpose of this review of enrollment and budgeting, as Pat has talked to me about it, has been in the middle school. So 5 years ago, I think it was about 5 years ago, Pat had brought to the attention of the middle school administration that she had brought up 7 years ago and then 5 years ago that with our lower enrollment across the district, at some point that's going to affect our staffing at the middle school. We can't keep taking the hits at the elementary school and the high school. We have to at some point manage this at the middle school. To be clear, so that's 7 years ago and then 5 years ago, that conversation was had. The view was to identify where that can happen effectively. It is not the stance of the central office to determine which positions that happens in. That's usually something where we look at the building principal who understands the daily workings of the building to make those recommendations. Over time, a conversation was had, and I was involved once I got here, around if we did that in social studies, can we? Right? Is that allowable? Because in my viewpoint, I have to manage curriculum that supports the main learning results. Those are our state standards. So the response is yes, technically you can, if you still maintain social studies instruction in some format. So you can adjust social studies instruction as long as that core instruction is still able to be met. Or you could apply a humanities model. That's what some districts have done. It's not my decision to make that. I'm just trying to be responsive to the question, the query, as the administration is looking at in what ways can we manage this. So 3 years ago, we've had federal dollars by which we could apply funds to, so the administration decided to continue to pursue the pathway of social studies. And since then, the federal dollars became available. So the positions were effectively cut from the local budget. Adult positions, not necessarily social studies positions, but adult positions. But then what happened is the federal dollars covered the social studies positions. So that was clearly communicated at all levels. And we had to hire for those social studies positions. So when people were hired for those positions, it was made very clear that those are federally funded positions and they expire. Okay, they're not part of our local budget. That did two things. One, it enabled us to continue to have really adequate class sizes with those positions funded at the building during COVID when we had significant social distancing requirements. Also, there was that recognition that the current 6th grade class academic data suggested they needed smaller class sizes at the time. Let's give them a little bit more time to have targeted direct instruction and to have more teachers with dedicated relationships to the group. So now we're in a position where 2 of those positions are expiring after this year and 1 after next year. The administration is working with teams of teachers in the building to look at a few things, like one is specifically scheduling. That is, again, a building decision, but they can look at creative ways to manage scheduling, creative ways to manage staffing to meet the expectations we have for all learners. That is, again, not the role I play or Pat plays. That's a building level decision. And that's a work in progress. I mean, I think they're on draft like 79 or something, like it's a continued work in progress. The easiest way to manage a staffing enrollment and redesign is through resignation. Like if people retire or resign, then it's easier to kind of look and figure out, okay, if we were to hire someone, do we want to hire in that role or do we want to hire in an alternate role? So a principal would clearly want to do that. And trying to figure out what that looks like and feels like is always a work in progress. And a lot of hiring for teaching positions starts showing up around April vacation. So that we're getting closer on the timeline for the building to have some autonomy and figuring out what is the best fit for next year, what is the best fit for the year after that, rather than cutting a known position that we already have. Okay, so there's all of that going on in the social studies realm.
Regardless, though, I don't mean to, I am interrupting you and I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
I don't want you to lose your train of thought.
Yeah, I got some thoughts.
So a couple things. The district values social studies and it's a requirement of the main learning results. Okay, so that's not in question. What that model looks like is what is under development, and a proposal hasn't been made. A proposal has not yet come forward for us to review. If there's a compromise in social studies that still meets the standards, that's going to come to the curriculum committee. You're going to review that if it looks significantly different than other core instruction, then that's going to come here. You're going to review it and it's going to pass a test of whether this meets expectations for the learning results or not. Your role is for the curriculum. Will students have access to that? Not necessarily for the staffing configuration, but there is an intersection between the two.
Clearly.
And so, and on the finance side of things, there's an intersection, right? So these positions are currently federally funded. If you want to add positions back into the budget, that's a pretty big hit on your local budget. It's something you'd have to consider as a finance committee, as a proposal from the curriculum committee, potentially to the finance committee, and as a full board, right? So that's that process.
When's the first draft of the
I'm sure it's
draft
forthcoming.
proposal?
It was just, yeah, we were just talking through it. But here's another thing to think about. All students have always had access to social studies, except for about 20% of the population until this year in the middle school. Historically, for many, many years before my time, if students were struggling in literacy or math and needed support from the Learning Lab, which is our intervention service provider at the middle school in math or literacy, they would attend Learning Lab and they would miss social studies instruction 4 days a week. And on the 5th day a week, they would have social studies instruction by the Learning Lab teachers, the math Learning Lab teacher and the ELA Learning Lab teacher, not by a social studies teacher. And for many, many years, I'm not sure the number, but a significant number of years, we were comfortable as a district having 20% of the population not receive social studies instruction routinely. Now, it's fair to be concerned that 100% of the students at the middle school might have a different configuration for social studies, but we don't know what that impact is yet. It might be the exact same configuration they currently have, or it might not. This particular year, no student is pulled from social studies for Learning Lab. So that was made last year. The change was made. If students have Learning Lab, there's a dedicated block of time for Learning Lab, and they still go to all 4 core classes. And so that's a significant change. Now 100% of students have access to social studies 100% of the time. That's a big change. So now we're at an intersection where looking at staffing and looking at enrollment, and the question continues to be asked as to whether or not the middle school will be impacted by staffing numbers when the elementary schools and the high schools have historically and continue to be monitored very closely.
Can you
So
tell
it's
us the
complicated.
ratio? Can you tell us, I know one student in 4th grade who she has 17 kids in her class.
Yeah, Terry, we're a couple minutes over, but I think this is where the class size policy would be really helpful. Sorry.
No problem.
I'll pull it up. My computer. There we go. So many tabs open. I just opened the federal relief tab 4 times apparently. Whoops.
Make sure that the tabs don't open that you don't want to have open.
Yeah, I'm on a tab. So is that good if I stay on the tab?
Right now I can see the website.
This room did not warm up while we were in here.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, I'm hoping that's gonna, oh, it's because the thing warmed up. So while the projector warms up, I'll get to it. So you're on your school board link, there's a policy, school board policies. And under instruction is where the class size policy sits. IB. And I'll make it bigger.
Is that IIB?
IIB, yep. So here's your class size policy. And this is the part you're asking about, Diane. So in middle school, the class size policy is 18 to 25 students. That's the range. In elementary, as you were just saying, 4th grade, that's 18 to 24. We have had class sizes in 5th grade get to 24 and sometimes exceed that within a year of 1 student or so. There's a procedure if it exceeds by 2 or more students, what has to happen. And then of course there's a recommended level. And so this is the policy we always follow when determining class sizes and staffing.
And would you say we are, this is SAD11's class size policy, and is it?
It's pretty comparable to lots of like districts everywhere. We have a state organization that helps us monitor that against other policies across the state.
Do we have, thank you, projections on what class sizes are gonna be if, as these federal dollars drop off over year 1 and year 2, what's gonna happen to class sizes?
Yeah, we expect that they'll fall within the class size range based on our enrollment trends.
And what's our class size right now for the social studies?
Well, I think some of the letters specified exactly this year, and I don't have that chart in front of me, but it's probably around 21 right now, across the core classes, and it could get to 23 without the positions, I think is what I think they said 23 or 23 and a half.
So class size really isn't necessarily a concern right now, the way we're looking at it.
Well, I mean, it all falls within policy. It is a concern for instructors. I mean, just to be fair,
That's my point.
the smaller the class size,
Yeah.
better relationships
The other
you have
issue
with
is
students.
who's actually teaching social studies, right? I mean,
But that's not in our purview.
I get it.
We do not get to select at this level who the teachers are.
Right.
That is absolutely not the role of the board, nor is it my role.
Yeah, I get it.
I have a question or two that maybe you'll say it's not your role, but one is certification.
Mhm.
And
That's a good question.
I understand that there's a lot of middle school teachers could be K-8 certification, in which case they're allowed to teach any of those.
Correct.
But I mean, I think if I were a principal and I had someone who loved math and they've been teaching it for 5 years, I'm not going to say presto chango, you're ELA or something like that.
Social studies teacher.
Right.
Or social
That's
studies.
also true.
And the other thing, I think I heard you mention it, but Becky said to me, there's a consideration of a ELA, social studies, humanities type thing. I'm just very curious about that, because I think you don't just invent that on one day, you know?
No, it takes
That would take
process.
a lot. And how much time would the social studies be? And I said, well, if you can do that, then there's math and science go together. And she said, yes. And I thought, yeah, but do you make the math and science fairly equal? you know, I mean, you don't wanna have like for ELA, social studies, like humanities things, say, today you're gonna read the Gettysburg Address, and that's that. Next week, you're reading something altogether different. It has to be a very good program for social studies to really be looked at. And I know many people, in fact, I've heard that somewhere in the state, there's a committee of people who are upset, and this is probably addressing high school, that we don't teach civics, and our population is not aware of how their
To
democracy.
be clear, because you said that and it's live streamed, we do teach civics in
Oh, do you?
MSAD11.
Okay, good, I'm glad.
I think
Is a-
social studies,
It is a significant strand in the main learning results, and it's embedded across our social studies units of study in very specific courses at the high school level and at every other level. We do teach civics.
Okay, well, that's great, thank you.
We do teach financial literacy as well, just to be very clear about that. So it's another
a good
rumor
one.
around now.
And then there's also a state certification, I was told by a retired teacher I know. It's grades 7 through 12.
That's also correct, and we
when
have
you
some
do
staff members.
Specialize.
We do have some staff members at the middle school level
Yeah.
who are certified in 7 through 12 in a particular content area. And unless they were certified in other content, like we have someone who's certified in English and social studies. But not everyone is,
Right.
and those, and we have to adhere to their certifications.
But these are concerning me, and as we go through this, you said this isn't the end of this. I'm looking for this in what comes up.
we've made some great progress over the last 2 or 3 years in math and in ELA.
Mhm.
And science has always been a strong point,
Next.
but I personally think social studies is extremely important.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you at all. It was decided years ago that at that point, the social studies staffing is where a decision was made. That doesn't mean a different decision can't be made. You know,
You're right.
there's other ways to look at staffing configurations. That is a decision that was made at the building level 5 years ago to start that pathway. Each building principal since then has been looking for what can meet the financial responsibilities that we have and the instructional needs that we have, and manage what the middle school model is, which is an exploratory method with significant allied arts structure and support to allow students to develop their identity and pursue their passions and explore that. So when they enter the high school, they have a stronger sense of, you know, where they might want to commit their secondary education and pursuits. Sort of the theory behind it all.
At the end of the day, though, it's all about money. It's all about.
At the end of the day, we have a certain amount in our local budget.
And the
for
board
staffing.
votes, and that's,
If
The recommendation, the onus is on the building,
yes,
the administration of the building.
yes.
We will approve or deny the building's recommendations, not the
Yes,
board's.
and if there's
Right.
if there's an impact significantly on an instructional model to meet the learning results, it will come to this committee. And you will need to look through that. If there's an impact ultimately on the staffing at the local level, it'll go to the finance committee and they'll have to look at that. And then that will go through the budget cycle.
I remember what Matthew said about this budget isn't really, you know, it doesn't blow your mind because
No, it
it's the
didn't.
core of who we are and what we do. So I care very much about roofs and paving. and I care more about this.
I,
but
That's
see,
why
that,
you're
that's
sitting
been
on
the
the
problem in the
curriculum committee.
past, that, you know, the folks that really are passionate about facility stuff, they give that, but they seem to always fall off the plate at the end of the day when we're looking at the budget. You know, over the last 4 years I've been on the board, you know, we put off a lot of major building issues to pick up the slack when the curriculum budget, for example, increases, or we need 2 extra teachers for social studies, or, so, yeah.
Yeah, you can't, it's all important.
In the end,
You gotta
it's
kind of pick your
complex.
poison. I mean, it's.
Right? It's complex, it's challenging, it's emotional, because
Yeah.
now we're dealing with people we know and care about, and they're teaching our children. And we want, our students to have the best and strongest experiences they can have. And processes take time. And we have to match those processes against a budget cycle, which makes it a little more challenging.
Right.
So I imagine this is going to come up again in our agenda items. I'll monitor it, and if we have a proposal to be reviewing, I'll bring it to the table for us to do in this realm. But that's sort of putting into context the language that was shared. I mean, it is clear that social studies instruction is very important. It's part of our core instruction, and it's an element we want to try to preserve, and that the staffing, there are a number of staff members at the middle school that are advocating on that part. And there's an impact. If we decide to follow the exact same model we're using right now, there is a financial impact. Unless someone can think of an alternate way, which is what they're working on. They're looking at all different ways of managing this and preserving core instruction for students. So that's where we're at.
All right, well, thank you.
Okay, thank you for your time. Our next meeting is April 12th at 3:30. So I'll have the agenda go out about a week in advance. So we'll see, and we'll keep it open a little bit in case we know something comes up, we need to give it the time it deserves. And if the federal estimates come through, then we'll also put that on the table.
Want this back?
Yeah, if you don't need it, I will take it back because it's a draft. And then the only other thing is, I know you had asked for staff to come do a check-in, so we'll try to do that in May and early June. Just so you can look ahead to interactions with other staff members. And I will also follow up on the Boys and Girls Club request.
Perfect.
Cool.
Thanks. Okay, thank you. Meeting is
you.
adjourned at 4:46, a little bit late, but
Slide stream off.
Yeah.